Hello and welcome to another GiantSlayerTV how to play video. Today our analysts will be diving into how to play Dawnbringers for patch 11.12. Dawnbringers received a minor buff in 11.12 along with several changes to Karma that have made her a more consistent carry. With a strong early game and several viable late game compositions, it's no surprise to see Dawnbringers at the top of the meta. We'll be covering core items, champions, and traits along with a brief look at each stage of the game. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Before we break down the actual comp, let's first talk about the pros and cons of playing Dawnbringer. The main strength of Dawnbringer is their flexibility in the current meta. With both Karma and Riven being viable carries, you have two distinct routes that you can take your board, either AP or AD. Karma is certainly more common and on average will have a more consistent placement in the top 4, but depending on your starting items and board, you can just as easily play Riven. Another benefit to running Dawnbringer is it's one of the strongest early game traits. Just Gragas and Kha'Zix alone is enough to form a winning early board, but hitting Riven during stage 2 is almost a guaranteed win streak. Whether it's 2 or 4 Dawnbringer, chances are you're going to be in a good position transitioning towards the mid game. Lastly, the composition scales well into the late game. With Garen, you've got a solid frontline mix with either Karma 2 as the main carry or Riven 3. And you can be quite flexible with your late game board as 4, 6, and even 8 Dawnbringer are all viable options. Of course, that does bring us to the negative of Dawnbringer in that they can struggle late game if you're not hitting upgrades on your champions. Particularly Garen, as Garen 2 is necessary to help buy time for Karma to ramp up in a fight. This issue isn't prevalent in 11.12 as they changed the mana functionality of Karma, but still, without Garen 2 in a solid frontline, the composition tends to falter against other late game builds. Riven 2 is also not strong enough to win late game fights, so you really have to go for Riven 3 if you want a chance at placing higher than 4th with Riven as the carry. This can be difficult if no one else is rerolling in your lobby or if you're contested. Which brings us to the last negative aspect of Dawnbringers: they are easily contested. Not just Riven, but Karma is popular right now, so multiple players are likely going to be going for her in a game. While Karma 1 can get you through stage 4 and some of stage 5, if you want to do well in the late game, you absolutely need Karma 2. Same with Garen, the more players trying to play him, the harder it will be to find him. All in all, the positives of Dawnbringers outweigh the negatives in the current meta. Given the amount of changes introduced in 11.12, we may see a lot of shifts in the meta, but for now, if you're the type of player that wants to spam one comp, Dawnbringers is a great choice for you. Let's now move on to the core items for Dawnbringers. Dawnbringers have 3 main item users, though there are a few outlier cases such as Soraka carry with Coven. We'll be focusing more on likely champions to play, which are Riven, Karma, and Garen. Generally speaking, you're going to play either Karma or Riven as the main carry, which depends on whether you have AD or AP items. It is possible to use both in your composition, though it's more common when running Riven as the main carry, as Karma's AoE can help win fights. Garen, on the other hand, is not a carry, but is your main frontliner for any Dawnbringer composition. This means you want at least 1 or 2 items on him to help maximize his usefulness. Luckily, being a frontliner, most defensive items will do just fine on Garen. Warmog's Bramble Vest, Guardian Angel, Titan's Resolve, and Shadow Locket are all great for Garen. Warmog's is common because you can make it early on in the game and give it to Gragas, and then transfer it over to Garen later. For Karma, the goal is to stack her with AP items. Blue Buff or Shojin are still acceptable items to have on Karma, but after the changes in 11.12, they aren't completely necessary, especially if you're running Invoker. That said, the most common items for Karma are Blue Buff, Jeweled Gauntlet, and Death Cap. Other options include Hextech Gunblade for added survivability, Archangels as a weaker alternative to Death Cap, and Hand of Justice as a catch-all offensive item. Infinity Edge also pairs well with Jeweled Gauntlet, but be wary of relying too much on critical hits, as Bramble Vest becomes a hard counter at that point. Riven items are all about AD. The best in slot is going to look like Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, and Runin's Hurricane. Deathblade is a good alternative to Infinity Edge, and you can use the regular or shadow variation of Runin's. Good defensive items to consider are Guardian Angel or Quicksilver. Because Riven has healing from both Dawnbringer and Legionnaire, you can usually play to maximize her damage output, though Bloodthirster is a necessity for an added layer of protection. Outside of those 3 item holders, you can always play for generic items that do well regardless of composition, such as Zephyr, Shroud, or Banshee's Claw. Chalice can do well with Karma, though be wary about investing too many components into your backline. Starting components won't matter too much, but Sword is helpful for you to go for if you're leaning towards playing Riven. Karma openings can either go Tier or Rod, with Rod being more flexible for Karma specifically. Glove can be good as you can lean into either Infinity Edge or Jeweled Gauntlet, but neither item is something that you really want to force early game. Defensive items may be the best choice, with Warmogs or Shadow Locket being top tier. With items covered, let's move on to the core champions and traits. Here's where things get interesting for Dawnbringers. As we've already covered, you can play either Riven or Karma as your carry, but both carries can be used in a plethora of boards. Just to list a few, there's 6 Dawnbringer 2 Revenant, 6 Dawnbringer with Legionnaire, 4 Dawnbringer 4 Invoker, and 4 Dawnbringer 4 Legionnaire. Basically, you have multiple variations of using either 4, 6, or 8 Dawnbringer as your core trait, and playing around either Karma or Riven as the carry. Currently, the most common composition for Dawnbringer is 6 Dawnbringer 2 Revenant. This uses Karma as the main carry, with the core champions being Garen, Karma, Soraka, Riven, Nidalee, Gragas as the 6 Dawnbringers, with Volibear and Ivern as the 2 Revenant. The benefit of running this variation is you get the value of running 6 Dawnbringer while also having a solid frontline with Ivern and Volibear. Plus, you get both Renewer and Invoker by adding in Ivern. It's also an easy board to pivot into from the early game. Riven, on the other hand, is commonly played with either 4 or 6 Dawnbringer. More than likely, it will be 4 with Riven, Garen, Karma, and any other Dawnbringer, with any other 3 Legionnaires. Mordekaiser boosts your frontline, Yasuo can open up the door for Nightbringer with Darius, and Kayle can be a backup carry if necessary. It's overall a more flexible board. The goal for Riven will be to roll at level 7 for Riven 3, so keep that in mind as hitting 5 costs will be difficult. At the end of the day, what exact composition you end up for depends a lot on what you're finding when rolling, as well as items you have going into the mid game. Our last section will focus on the different stages of the game, beginning with the early game. After the opening carousel, the goal during stage 1 and 2 is simply to play your strongest board. The ideal early game board for transitioning into mid-game Dawnbringers will use champions like Gragas, Kha'Zix, and if you're lucky, Riven. Riven in particular is fantastic in the early game, even if you don't commit to giving her AD items. Just having her is enough to boost your board's strength, especially since it opens up the door to running early for Dawnbringer. Other potential opening boards include Ziggs as an item holder with Hellions, Bran carry with Abomination, and any generic AD champion like Kalista to hold on to items for Riven. There is a lot of flexibility, but keep in mind your items are the main determining factor for your mid-game board. If you're slamming a lot of AD items, chances are you're playing Riven or pivoting into a different AD composition later. AP items means Karma or other AP champions. The other aspect of the early game is making sure that you're leveling at the standard intervals. While staying at level 4 and playing for a loss streak is a viable option, it's generally better to level, as maintaining high health is the easiest way to comfortably hit the mid game. Especially if you're playing Karma, as a strong early game generally means you can fast 8 sometime around 4 or 5. With that, let's move into the mid game. It may be necessary to roll at level 6 if you have a really weak board after Krugs, but ideally you want to skip having to spend too much gold on 6 so you can roll on 7. High roll early game boards, meaning you're winning the majority of your rounds, means you likely won't have to roll on 7 either. Of course, if you're playing a Riven composition, staying on level 7 and rolling will be your goal. Once you hit level 7 after Wolves is when you'll generally know the path that you're going to be taking your board. Generally, you will know after Krugs based on your components, but after Wolves will for sure be the point to either go AD or AP comp. If it's AD, try to slow roll on level 7 to build your board around Riven as the carry. If AP and you have more than 60 health and an alright board, aim to level 8 around 4 or 5. Either way, the game plan in stage 4 is to work towards whichever composition you're playing. There are a few mid-game transitions that you can make if you're not hitting either Riven or Karma. With AD items, you can pivot into several champions, but as Riven is a Legionnaire, chances are you'll have a few of them already on your board. This means Draven is perfect to pivot into and transfer items to if you've rolled a bunch at level 7 and aren't hitting many Rivens. From there, you can add in additional Legionnaire and go for a standard Draven comp. AP items are a bit harder to flex out of, as Karma is the main carry at the moment for that style of play. Either you had to have already been committing to something like Brand, or you're playing for a late game 5-cost champion like Teemo or Heimerdinger. That said, if you find one of those champions, you can pivot into them. Teemo is on average a better option, as Heimerdinger needs a lot of 5 costs to do well. Either way, try to pivot into a 4 Invoker composition where Karma isn't the main carry. Vel'Koz is an option as well to pivot into, but he's not quite as strong as the other late game options. That said, if you're able to 2-star him quickly, it's fine to build a composition around him using solid frontliners like Garen and Rel with backline support like Syndra. Spellweaver can also help boost his damage if necessary. Let's now move into the late game. The endgame economy for Dawnbringers is all about rounding out your composition with upgraded 5-cost champions. Garen is the most important, and to place in the top 2, you will need him to be level 2. For Karma compositions, it's common to use Volley Bear, but you may also be running Kindred or Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger is useful as his ability can apply healing reduction. Riven will mainly want Garen and Darius as the 5-cost, which you likely won't be finding until after you hit Riven 3 and can level to 8. Most compositions will stay at level 8, but you can always play for level 9 if your board is mostly capped and strong enough to sit on the gold for a few rounds. For the most part, the late game is going to focus more on scouting and positioning. Riven is a bit easier to position as she'll be near the front line, so move her away from being killed by the enemy carry and you'll likely be fine. Karma, on the other hand, needs a lot of attention. If you're not scouting properly and moving Karma around often, the chances of losing a round due to poor positioning is quite high. It's especially important to dodge assassins, as Karma won't always target them if they're right on top of her. And Thresh is a major threat against Karma since he can pull her towards the center of the board. Overall, as long as you're scouting and rearranging your board often, you shouldn't have to worry too much about positioning with Dawnbringers. Their inherent healing covers up a lot of the problems. And that's all for today's video, folks. Dawnbringers are certainly a standout synergy in the current meta with the amount of flexibility that they provide. There's something for everyone, whether that's playing AD, AP, or even rerolling. Let us know in the comments section below which composition you'd like us to cover in the next How to Play video. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.